Well, if anyone's going to review Anne Juliet, it's gonna be me. It's interesting to look back and realize I haven't actually ever reviewed Anne Juliet on this channel. I saw it about 2 months before it closed in the West End, and I had standing tickets. And I will say, to be fair, if you're going to do standing for any show, Anne Juliet's a great show to do standing for, because it's a very boppy musical. So you can kind of dance along when you're standing at the back of the dress. It was great. But I remember being quite taken aback by the musical. I was kind of expecting, you know, just a kind of haphazardly arranged jukebox musical, but it provided a lot of genuine heart and an interesting take on the story that doesn't sound very good on paper. But now Anne Juliet is back and touring the country. I caught it at the new Wimbledon Theatre this week, so what do I think? Does this version still have the spark that I saw in the musical before? Let's find out. But if you haven't seen my face before, hi, I'm Ellie, I talk about theatre. I am the most chaotic theatre person on the internet. I do reviews, I do discussions, I do versus brackets and rankings, and if any of that sounds interesting to you, please consider hitting like and subscribe. It really helps me, it helps out the channel. But let's dive into Anne Juliet. The Romeo is silent. I legitimately think that when it comes to jukebox musicals trying to do an original plot, Anne Juliet is surprisingly one of the stronger ones. And I think that's really weird when you look at the plot to Anne Juliet. The plot to Anne Juliet, on paper, in a simple line, is what if Juliet didn't die at the end of Romeo and Juliet, and instead, that is the start of the story. We've seen a lot of parodies and a lot of pop culture make fun of a plot like this. Romeo and Juliet 2 is like a running gag, making fun of not only like sequel culture, but also just the idea of trying to build upon a story where the two main characters literally die. And because of that, when you first hear that plot synopsis, you kind of go, oh, this isn't going to be very good. However, within that assumption, I think Anne Juliet is very clever with what it does. Because in actuality, when you actually see the plot of Anne Juliet unfold, it's less so a sequel to Romeo and Juliet, but actually a retooling. Using this plot and adding a meta element to it to make it work. They do this for the characters of Anne and Shakespeare. Shakespeare has just finished writing Romeo and Juliet, and Anne Hathaway comes along to see it. And she is very unimpressed by the ending, and so decides, alongside her husband, to rewrite the whole thing, with the ending becoming the start, and exploring Juliet's life without Romeo. And through this, it kind of takes this very naff idea and actually gives it a lot of purpose, using it as a launching pad to give some commentary not only on Shakespeare's relationship with women and how he wrote female characters, but also his relationship with his wife Anne Hathaway, comparing and contrasting them with Romeo and Juliet in the text. Speaking about Shakespeare's work and how little of it actually features tributes to Anne Hathaway. And I think this is one of the strongest elements of David West Read's book. While it's not as thorough as it maybe could be, while the metaphor is very on the nose in places, while it's very heavy-handed at times giving you this, it is a genuinely clever way to tell this story and to add some extra depth to this plot line. Things that in a jukebox musical, when people are really just here for the music, you don't need to do, but the fact that they go above and beyond to do is very appreciated. And I think makes the musical as a whole a lot stronger. And what's more, I think the plotline is just fun. I think, you know, while it does have those moments of depth, I think it does fully understand what it is and what it's going for. It's fun and it's campy and it's silly and it's really mainly here just to accommodate the songs. And I think it's extremely successful at that. There's a real charm to it. I think it balances its characters very well, introducing new ones and having fun ways for Anne Hathaway and Shakespeare to introduce them into the story, or in the sake of some certain characters, introducing them back into the story. With the two kind of taking in turns to write, adding their own touches to it, and furthering their own narrative of what this story should be. And that having good reflections on their relationship at that certain moment. And a lot of these are really cleverly thought out. A character like like May is a really interesting addition. Obviously, and Juliet very much blends and toes the line between modern and Shakespearean. The Tudor / Elizabethan / Stuart, because he was alive for James I as well. That era with a more modern touch. All of Shakespeare's plays, they are written for the monarchs at the time. Why do you think Richard III gets such a bad rap? Because it was written around the time of Henry VIII, whose dad literally defeated that guy. So they didn't really want a good reputation for Richard III. I digress. I just find history interesting. Shh. Where was I? Yeah, so they have a really interesting way of blending the modern and history. I think a really great example of this, and especially coming into this as a trans person, is to look at how they deal with the character of May. May is a new addition into this story, framed initially as giving Juliet a best friend, someone she can actually speak to, recognizing the fact that in the original, Romeo has Benvolio, Romeo has friends, but Juliet doesn't, furthering those plot lines of Anne trying to give Juliet more of a voice. And May adds a queer perspective into this show, with the character being non-binary. I think it's very easy to look back at a lot of Shakespeare's work and add a queer perspective onto it. I mean, look at Twelfth Night. Look at Twelfth Night. That one's for the lesbians, okay? And Juliet trying to bridge the gap between a modern perspective and the Elizabethan and the Shakespearean adds in May. I think May's storyline in this show is really interesting. They never really use the word non-binary to describe May, but it's very easy to realize that's what they're going for. And I do enjoy, for the most part, how they handle it. I think there's a lot of successes that Anne Juliet has with this non-binary character. I really like how, there's moments where we see struggles with certain non-binary themes, like misgendering, like bathrooms, but the main crux of May's storyline in this piece is about a romantic entanglement. It's not about their gender identity at all. While it is often nice to see these challenges, and as a trans person, I can attest to the fact that these are daily challenges that we do face, it is nice that that's not the main thing about May. That's not the main plotline about May. May's main plotline is about relationships. It's about their friendship with Juliet. It's about their blossoming romantic entanglement with Francois. I think it's very important, especially in a piece like this, which isn't really going for a queer audience. That's not the main audience they're attracting. If you're going to have queer representation in these pieces, it's nice to show, a three-dimensional side to it. The only thing I will say that I'm not quite sure how I feel about is how they handle the gender roles, for a lack of a better term. Because May is never associated with the term non-binary. They never specifically use the word non-binary. In the first monologue introducing May, they describe May as just May. Whatever May chooses to be, they don't specifically name that though. However, they are very quick to kind of associate May with both of the binary genders, which I understand why they're doing that. I understand why they go about that. Placing them in between both genders is a very common way to look at a non-binary perspective, if a bit simplistic. But they get placed in the boy band. There's a whole song called I Kissed a Girl. And I don't want to phrase this as criticism, because it's something that I kind of wonder about, and I go back and forth on whether I like it or not, because I can very much see what they're going for with it. But I don't know if having them be a part of both, but not really having a clear declaration of I am neither, is the best way to handle this to an audience who this might be their first experience of a non-binary character. I think it's a very interesting discussion to have, because I go back and forth with it, as I said, and I'm not condemning it at all. I think, especially in a time where there's just very little non-binary representation in theatre, this is a decent example. This is a good example of it. But moving on, I think that all of these characters are so fun. I like how they pair them together. I've seen jukebox musicals that are trying to do similar things to this, trying to establish a lot of different characters and give them all their own relationships, and really, really struggle to hit the right balance. cough, cough, I should be so lucky. But I think this manages to give just enough time to all these characters while not having the main relationship feel like it's getting lost in the shuffle. And I think it definitely helps that a lot of Juliet and Romeo's relationship is contrasted to Anne and Shakespeare's. It allows you to kind of commentate on both at the same time, kind of have your cake and eat it too. And I think this narrative does really complement a lot of this music. And if I can come out of a storyline which I look at and scoff at on paper and actually enjoy, I think you've done very well. But let's be honest, the main selling point of this musical is the music. And I do not say this lightly. Max Martin is a genius. Like, you do not realize before going into & Juliet how many bangers Max Martin wrote and continues to write. I love these orchestrations here. I think it does a great job at making this music feel very fitting to a musical theatre world, especially as this musical is going for a more traditional musical structure, rather than something like, you know, Tina or MJ or Jersey Boys, which is placing the music into the storyline of the artist's life. And I think they do a really good job at blending these into the narrative. There's very common moments where it's comedic, or there's like a really fun button to lead you into the song. And I think that always adds to the charm of it. I Want It That Way becomes this really fun back and forth argument between Shakespeare and Anne on what direction they're going to take this show in, what way they're going to take Romeo and Juliet. Baby One More Time becomes a moment of grieving for Juliet, a nice moment to gain a sense of her voice. And the Juliet that we have here now, instead of the version that we are more accustomed to from the classic story. I love the twists that we get as we see Juliet's friends come in, lifting her spirits. You know, the sequence of Domino, Show Me Love, Below, like that whole sequence where they're going to Paris, going to the club. It lifts the show phenomenally. I love how wonderfully the relationship between Angelique and Lance is set up. They only really have like a couple of scenes to do this, but a song like Teenage Dream and Break Free put together really does well to do that. I love the comedy of a placement of a song like Oops, I Did It Again. Since You've Been Gone literally becomes about how far Juliet has come since leaving Romeo. I think it's very helpful that this just has such a strong score. Every single one of these songs are so memorable. You've got the entire back catalogue of Max Martin's work, and they do a great job at picking the right ones. Not only the strongest in terms of material, but also what's going to complement this storyline. It feels like they were working very closely with each other to make sure that these blended very well. Instead of one being written around the other, they feel extremely complementary. The only thing I will say, and it hurts to say this because I do like all of these songs, is that there is a certain slump in Act 2. After the wedding sequence, I feel like there's one too many songs and one too many scenes here before we pick it back up. That really slows down the pace of the show. I feel like we kind of have a moment where we hit this really high and this really shocking twist of a moment. And then we have kind of 3 songs in a row kind of all doing a very similar thing. And again, it hurts for me to say because I love both of these songs, but I feel like there comes a point where you have to cut either stronger or fucking perfect. Because they do very similar things, and you kind of get to a point where you just want to get to Raw. You just want to get to that moment where Juliet stands back up on her feet. But on the whole, phenomenal work here. Max Martin's music works perfectly in a musical format, and I think it's so complementary to that book and blends so well that adds a lot to the experience. Now, let's speak about the one thing that has kind of shrunk down naturally from the West End version, and that is the set and design. Now, yes, if you want to compare this to the West End version, this is downsized. There's no arguing about that. But then again, I think it would be very cruel to compare it because there's absolutely no way they could have toured with what they had, especially not to as many venues that they are doing on this tour. The West End version had a revolve that literally lifted up. It had a crane lift come up from the bottom of the stage. It had so many set pieces, and when you're in a stage like the Shaftesbury, yes, you can do that. This tour can't, but for the most part, it finds fun ways to work around that and still have moments of big spectacle. I think there's only one song where I felt like I missed the revolve and the lift in that revolve, and that was I Kissed a Girl. And still, what they did with that song in this touring version still works very well. I think people going in who didn't see it in the West End will not lose out on anything massively. As someone who did see that, I can see all those moments and be like, oh, okay, that's not as effective stage like this. So I do miss how that revolve added a little extra depth to how this set moved. But I'm not expecting them to tour a revolve. I'm not expecting any of that. I think it would be very audacious to request that, and would also mean that it would probably not be able to tour to the venue I literally saw it at. The only set piece I will say I definitely feel like was too much of a downgrade was the house piece. There's a house piece that is a backdrop for a lot of the show when they're in Paris, and in the West End it's a bit more of a solid structure, where now it's this kind of screen that goes a little bit see-through for most of the show. I didn't really love this effect too much, just as a personal preference, but even then it's not that bad, and I think they still managed to have these big moments of spectacle. They still have the trick with the chandelier, they still have the sequence with Romeo and Juliet riding on the sky ride. They still managed to find a way to have the platform for Raw. I think they're very clever with their workarounds. I think they're very clever with making sure that it still feels big and wild and spectacular, even as it has to be shrunk down to fit the nature of a tour. Even if it feels very weird to see a Luke Shepherd show without a revolve or a lift. I swear, that man loves a revolve and a lift. He really does. Starlight Express, Little Big Things, and Juliet. He loves it. And I'm just saying, they better put a revolve in for just one day when it goes to the Shaftesbury, otherwise it's not a Luke Shepherd directed show. But with that said, let's speak about this cast. I really enjoyed this cast. Geraldine Sacdalen is an amazing Juliet. It is shocking when you find out she is straight after training. She has all of the heart, all of the emotion, all of the power, all of the energy that you need for this version of Juliet. Her vocals are phenomenal. I want to listen to her versions of Baby One More Time, of Oops, I Did It Again, of Raw on repeat forever. I think one of the biggest highlights in the show was Laura Denning as Anne. Oh my God, what a betrayal. That's the way that it is, has always been this giant moment. But Laura Denning just takes that and lives for it, adding so much personal emotional stakes into her portrayal, so much emotion with some of the biggest and strongest belts. Oh, it's gorgeous. And I think she adds a real humanity to a lot of the relationship between her and Shakespeare. You really feel her personal stakes in the matter and how left behind she feels. I think this was the performance of the night for me. She's paired alongside the Wanted's Jay McGuinness playing Shakespeare, and I enjoyed his performance. I think he has a lot of fun moments. I did actually really enjoy his vocals as well. I really do enjoy that pairing of Denning and McGuinness together. I think they do a really good job bouncing off each other and building that chemistry, especially as they're creating this show together. However, I do think there are some emotional beats that he doesn't hit as strongly as I would like him to. I really loved Sandra Marvin as Angelique. So full of energy. I think Angelique in this musical is such a unique and wonderful presence. And I absolutely adore the relationship between her and Sacdalen's Juliet, especially in a song like Oops, I Did It Again. Jordan Broach as May. It's really, really beautiful performance, with an absolutely beautiful take on I'm Not a Girl, Not Yet a Woman, and having wonderful chemistry with Kyle Cox as Francois, this lovable and kind of naive character, who Cox plays as really sweet. There's also Romeo, who at the performance I saw was played by Liam Morris, who does a great job at selling this kind of airheady bad boy type, and comes into the show with really strong energy. And the only character we haven't spoken about is Lance, played by Dr. Ranj Singh. Now, let's be fair for a second. Ranj Singh is not a trained musical theatre person. He's a doctor. And I think if there's any role that you're going to put someone who isn't massively trained in musical theatre into, it is this character. It's not a amazingly difficult sing. It's quite over the top and fun. And I think Ranj Singh, for the most part, does a good job with it. Even if, the French accent. I know the French accent's not meant to be good. I know that's the joke. But I do think it was maybe a little bit too bad. At times, being almost illegible. On the whole, I think Juliet does still shine on tour. It's stripped back for sure, but I think this cast are really, really strong as an ensemble. And I think the story still holds up. It's a story that on paper sounds so bad. It's something that's been joked about time and time again, but they find an interesting angle to play with it, and commentary to add within that, which I think definitely boosts this show up overall. And with that, it delivers on exactly what you want out of a show like this. It's wonderfully endearing and so much fun. But what do you think? Have you seen Juliet either in the West End or this new tour version? Let me know all your thoughts on the show in the comments down below. If you did enjoy this video, please consider hitting like and subscribe. It really helps me out helps out the channel. Here's some links to some other videos on screen right now and a link to my Instagram if you'd like to drop me a follow over there. There's other social links and a merch store in the description down below. But that's it for me today, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.